seed church in New Canaan, Connecticut. New Canaan, Connecticut is a town in Greenwich, Connecticut County. Do any of you know or have heard of places like Greenwich, Connecticut, or New Canaan, Connecticut? No. Okay, have you heard about the upper 1% of the American economy?
Oh, yeah.
So the CEO, CFO, COOs, if it has a C in front of it, they live in New Canaan and Greenwich, Connecticut. They live there in their big mansions. Martha Stewart has a home there. If you've got lots of money, you live in that area. And you move back and forth on the train or by your chauffeur to New York City to do your jobs. So as a youth leader at this church of this giant youth group that had been doing amazing work for many years, and I was one of multiple youth leaders, it was a little rough. So I want you to picture this. Top 1% of the American economy. I am working with their children of the top 1% of the American economy. Not to get stereotypical, but most raised by nannies, very different, interesting situations. Most of my kids who had licenses drove the top line models of the expensive cars you could think of. We're talking top of the line BMWs, Mercedes, Lexus, cars I didn't even know existed.
Volkswagen.
And I pull in with my 1990 Honda Civic that was literally falling apart, that I didn't know was gonna make it across the Rocky Mountains when I took this poor little car that had lived in Southern California where there's no weather to the east coast of Connecticut where it did not like the weather. This car that in order for, it was cold and snow and all of that, it would take like about a half an hour for the window to defrost, so I would drive like this, because at least this part I could see through. And for some reason, my car, when it would brake or I would be sitting idle, it would make this like obnoxious screeching noise that people would look at me like, what the heck is going on? And I don't know what you're hearing. To the point that sometimes my parking brake would get stuck, and so in order for me to get the car to go and put it back into drive, I got really good at punching it, like with a lot of force. And my kids, mind you, with their top of the line BMWs, one of which liked to tell me, he crashed his car one time and his parents just bought him a new one. Thought my car was hysterical. They looked at this car as like something that had come out of a cartoon or a museum. They thought it was hilarious. In fact, they thought it was almost like being a daredevil to sit in the car and have me drive them to youth events. Like, oh, we survived Pastor Alyssa's car. Didn't die, guys, it didn't blow up, which was probably actually true thing. But it was really hard to relate to these kids. It was really hard. And mind you, I didn't grow up, dirt poor, but I grew up very much like middle class, lower middle class. And to try and tell them about my life when I was their age, or to try and connect with them in a way that didn't make me look like an oddity, or didn't make me look so far out of their scope of reality, it was hard. I did not go back, y'all. And what was interesting is I walked away from that ministry realizing that ministry to the very, very rich is just as important as ministry to the very, very poor. And in fact, a lot of the needs of those populations overlap. Yes, we might not be talking about, the basic needs that those in poverty are trying to find, like clothing, housing, good health care. But when we're talking about emotional needs, connection, relationship, unconditional love, forgiveness, feeling worthy, feeling seen. Those are very much the same. And so even though I stepped back and I said, I am not going to renew my contract at New Canaan UCC, but I could see the need. I could see the need. This passage, we often only read the last line. It gets plucked out of this story more times than it should. You cannot serve God and wealth. You cannot have two masters. Sounds good. Sounds very Jesus-y. But when you apply it to the rest of this parable, it gets a little wonky. It gets a little wonky because nobody in this story is actually really doing good things. The only person who really gets like the best deal out of this is the borrowers. So let me give you a little ancient Rome, Israel economics lesson, okay? So typically, in this time, I'm gonna pull up my notes here, rich landlords and rulers were loan sharks, using exorbitant interest rates to amass more land and to disinherit peasants of their family land in direct violation of biblical covenantal laws. The rich man or lord in this story, along with his steward or debt collector, were both exploiting desperate peasants. When he reduces the payments, this is according to Professor Barbara Rossing, the steward may have simply been forgiving his own cut of the interest. Or he may have been doing what the law of God commands, namely forgiving all the hidden interest in the contracts. As another scholar, Richard Horsley, describes, to ingratiate himself with the debtors, he had them change the amount they owed on their bills to exactly the amount they owed, eliminating the hidden and prohibited interest. If the rich landlord was not a Gentile, but a Jew, the text does not say if he's Gentile or Jew, he would know the Torah teaching against interest. The rich man, suddenly recognizing that he needed at least to appear to be observing covenantal laws, commended his steward. There's a whole lot of shady business going on in this story. And I love the line. Did you catch it? It says, and I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. What, Jesus? What? I checked that. Multiple translations of that. I was like, this must be a typo. It must supposed to say, make friends for yourselves by means of honest wealth. So that when, nope, it's dishonest, folks. It kind of reminds me of the old joke, have you ever heard about find yourself a friend who owns a boat?
I don't think that's a joke. I think that's a life motto.
I think she has a friend who owns a boat. Yeah, I always like to joke, I have a friend who doesn't own a boat, but who is an incredible baker. And I keep her around because, man, I get a lot of really good baked goods off of her. And because she's a great person. Is this Jesus telling us to use people for the greater good?
Sounds like Donald Trump.
Oh, don't say that.
I don't know about that. There's something very interesting in this text. It is not actually calling us into this idealistic way that we often think of Jesus' teaching about wealth, where we need to, as Jesus said to the disciples, sell everything and go with just the coat on your back and the staff in your hand and, tell everyone about who I am and what I stand for. That wealth is this thing that is bad and we have to avoid it. We can't serve two masters. In fact, a lot of modern translations of this passage turn the terminology of just wealth, when in the actual translation, it's supposed to be read as manna. And we're supposed to read it as manna, because not manna as what they eat in Exodus, but as the God. idol. That wealth is often becomes a god and an idol for us. But that wealth has a purpose in this. Did you also note that the manager does not get hired back? He does not get hired back. The borrowers get off with a really great deal. The master gets this really nice reputation that he's, forgiving and compassionate. And the manager, as we noted in his little self-talk section, is like, now I've made a couple friends who maybe will give me a job because I got no skills elsewhere. I'm like, if you looked at that man's resume, I don't think any of those people would actually eventually hire him. He's not that great with his other people's wealth. But what is the point? Make friends for ourselves, yourselves, by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Make friends. Make friends with those who you might not want to make friends with. That we need equally just those with all the resources, that we need to be making relationships with those who don't have any resources. That we need to make friends with and minister to those who hold all the wealth and a lot of times do shady things with that wealth, just as much as those who are upright and righteous and doing the hard work on the ground for social justice. And this even, correct me if I'm wrong, but Jesus is even saying, manipulate that wealth so that it helps those who need it. So that at the end of the day, teach them how to use their money, teach them how to use their resources, so that when it is all gone, I love that, be friends with them so you can help them spend all their money. When it is all gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. They will know what matters. Make a rich friend so you can teach them how to spend it all on those who need it. It's very antithetical to what we read in most of Scripture. And it's funny because the passage after this is the story of the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man who goes, in essence, to hell and just wants one drop of water, and who was never helped anyone in his life. And Lazarus, this poor man who ends up in, heaven, the promised land, and he's like, oh, Lazarus, would you just give me one tiny drop of water? It's a hard passage to read because we want it to be fair. We want the master and the manager to have consequences for their actions. We want someone to have some life-changing moment where now they're going to go and maybe the master's going to forgive everybody's debt. Everyone gets a discount now. And maybe that does happen. That'd be wonderful. We don't know. But the reality here is that Jesus is trying in some ways to teach us that the relationships that we have, the relationships that we build with people can have an impact. And that we shouldn't shy away from folks that we might not necessarily think are worthy of our love and time and relationship. And that even those who hold power, even those who hold wealth, even those who may be the ones causing all the chaos, that they still need an example of what love and forgiveness is. And who's going to do it? Who's going to be the one to show up and to offer a different way of thinking, a different way of being? And what is different in this passage than maybe And another is that what is being forged here is relationships. Yeah, the manager is kind of shady. I'm not gonna let him off the hook. But he is trying to create relationships because he knows that if he helps forgive these people's debt, he's not getting his job back. But maybe he can forge relationships with people that he helped out that might then help him in the future. This give or take. And maybe Jesus, by ending this with saying you can't serve two masters, you can't serve God and wealth, is saying maybe that this manager is going to figure out through this process of losing his job and helping discount people's debts and building these relationships that he sees what matters. Not that he's bad at his job and needs to stop acting like the prodigal son, but that maybe he should be like the prodigal son. And he shows up saying, I will do anything, and ends up in relationship like the prodigal son ends up. It's a tricky, tough passage. And you might disagree with me how I'm interpreting it, and that's great. But it's interesting in that it challenges us to look at relationships differently and to look at the way that we influence each other, and most importantly, to look at the way that we are called to influence those in power just as much as those who are powerless. And to recognize, I think, I'm pulling this kind of out of the side, but that those who are in power are also powerless in other ways. I'm going to circle back and end with this. When I worked with those kids in New Canaan, yes, I didn't stay with them, but I did build relationships with the collective of kids that I had. And what I saw were the same kind of kids I'd seen in every context of my life. Kids who wanted love, who wanted attention, who wanted adults to show up and hear their story, and to see them as fully formed human beings who had needs and wants and hurts, and to see them in all of their brokenness and to say that's okay, and you're gonna be okay, and you got people you can count on. Because not all of them had homes and relationships and situations where they had those needs met. And so yeah, they didn't understand my silly car that was falling apart. But we could understand together the need to feel like family. God is calling us into relationships, whichever way those relationships looks, to help us understand, as Jesus said, we are family. Amen?
Amen.